I've seen very often mathematicians and scientific experts who have a facility in research alone speak about the beautiful aspect of equations. In one of my favorite TED Talks by Murray Gell-Mann, who is a Nobel physicist from Caltech, he said that the fundamental equations of particle physics are very beautiful. There's another book, I'm sure most of you have read it. It's called The Music of Primes by Marcos de Sotoy. He talks about the elegant patterns that numbers have. Incidentally, the year 2015 turns out to be a prime palindrome. And this is something very beautiful in the cult of number theorists. But for an artist whose world is contained with paints and paintings, this kind of beauty is not accessible right away. With the discovery of fractals, I'm sure most of you have seen them on your screensavers, a complete family of beautiful objects came into the realm of existence, and they affected artists and scientists alike. By the way, fractals are geometrical figures and which repeat a fixed pattern indefinitely as you keep magnifying them. A very simple fractal can be constructed with the help of circles. You can see one right there. Mathematicians call this the Apollonius gasket. If you were a biologist and you happen to see the cells of a cabbage under a microscope, you would see something like this. Aren't the structures very similar? And this picture also reminds me of soap bubbles. One of the preliminary things that had intrigued my curiosity was the beautiful colors on soap bubbles and water droplets. And I had actually started my research by studying these structures. I never made papers out of them though. But what's absolutely fascinating is that phenomena originating from absolutely unconnected branches of science tend to study structures that look similar. The fundamental laws of physics and the laws of evolution have chosen these shapes to be the most useful of all. On the other hand, if you look at the mathematical underpinnings of painting or art, people tend to study or figure out hidden patterns that are found in archaic paintings. A famous one is Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, where people say that the face of the maiden is set into the boxes of an Archimedean spiral. The spiral is something very special in mathematics. It has to do with what is called as the golden ratio. But if a scientist looks at Mona Lisa, he wonders, how could the face of the maiden be less beautiful if it was not on the spiral? So that's really funny. So the beauty that artists see, or the mathematical aspects that artists see in art, is not accessible to the mathematician itself. But sometimes the beauty of art is hard to accept for the best of artists themselves when they see something like this. And the purest form of art can be very difficult, and it might look something like this. Incidentally, this painting can sell for $1 million these days. I'm sure Da Vinci would be turning in his graves. But on the other hand, if you're a scientist and you happen to find an idea which is hard to explain to others, it is unlikely to make it into any journal, unless, of course, you happen to be the editor yourself. So as you can see, that appreciation is very subjective, and it's hard to reconcile with the approaches that scientists and artists take, and especially about things what they call beautiful. Since I have been doing both for quite a few years, I have a hard time juggling with this apparently incompatible notions of beauty. But right away, I would like to say that there is something very beautiful about the process of creating a painting and in the process of solving a problem. And there are some emotions which indeed connect in these two steps. And I would draw from my experiences and try to bring to you what are these emotions and what is really beautiful about being a creator. So if I were to do a painting, typically I would just start by taking a large sheet of paper, prefer large sizes because it's more easy to construct details with colors, and start with a drawing. And it takes time. This is the most crucial step, that where you plan out the figure, you plan out the posture, you have to be very careful, you want to show that you are really great an artist. And this step is very crucial. But after this step, I do something that is very original and it's very funny. What I do is I take the sheet of paper and give it a bath with 1 bucket of water. And this is something that I learned from an accident actually. That accident occurred a few years back when I was painting a picture in a very traditional way. And when it was almost complete, a complete mug of tea spilled over it. It was a disaster. I threw it right away, and that was the end. After a few days, I just looked at the figure again, and I thought like it's appearing more inviting. I thought that it's more beautiful than earlier. So I thought maybe these accidents can induce some sort of beauty, which I should learn, and which I learned also. And I have employed it in all the paintings since then. So what I do is I take this sheet which is dripping wet, and once it is wet, I start putting some colors onto it. What I can only control at this stage is the colors that land on the sheet. But what is absolutely on the mercy of chance is the extent to which colors interact with each other, the extent to which they spread. Typical features that occur at this stage look like this. If you think about it for a moment, it's a very difficult step, because if you had a critical drawing somewhere and some lot of dark colors spread in that region, because you're doing it absolutely randomly, it might be very difficult to subdue these colors at a later stage. Yeah, that's a very big challenge. And that brings me to the next step of painting. So once the sheet dries, you have these blobs and patches which formed randomly. I look at them and wonder, can something be built out of these figures? I mean, of course, the painting is not yet started, but the very first step is to imagine figures. It's a very abstract step where I think, can these abstract blobs and patches be given a shape? And I think most of my paintings really reveal the kind of thought process that goes in at this stage. The rest of the step is like building the details, which I guess any artist is familiar. Another thing which is unhappy about being uncertain about your start is that you never know whether it will make something look good. Like sometimes I create a patch, in my mind I think it will look like this, but it looks like that. And I abandon the work right away. I have done it many times. My parents often say that it's a consequence of fluctuating moods, but it's okay. Artists have a lot of reputation for that. But let me tell right away that as an artist, if you were an artist, you would only understand that this act of abandoning something when it doesn't connect with your notion of beauty is a very relieving process. It really relieves a lot of frustration. But not being able to complete what you start, any enterprise, is not new in art. It's also there in science. When I start research, I start with a problem. Always we want to solve a problem that has not been done by others. So right away you can't be taking help. And when you start a problem, there is no priori guarantee that you're going to have a solution for it. That's a deeper question, whether a solution exists. And if at all it does, whether you will be able to find it is a harder question. One of the famous problems in math, known as the Fermat's last theorem, it made its way into the Guinness Book of World Records as one of the toughest problems in mathematics. People worked on it for about 375 years, and a few years back, a Princeton mathematician named Andrew Wiles found a solution to it, and it is said that he spent 7 years just thinking about it. So when you hear such things, you immediately ask, how long will it take until your impatience ruins your hopes? Sometimes the situation is worse than that. I don't know if you have heard of it, but there's this problem called the Riemann hypothesis, which was put forth by the great German mathematician David Hilbert in 1902. The problem was known before that, but he formalized it a lot. And since then, I guess countless people have tried their luck on it. And till date, there is no solution. But there are few papers which have already appeared which say that how not to approach the Riemann hypothesis. You can try your luck. So there is no answer to that. I'm pretty sure no one has found a way around this. It is an impasse which every creator has to go through, that there is increasing degree of uncertainty with greater challenges you take. In the year 2012, I started formally working on a problem in quantum mechanics. It was brought to my notice by one of my closest friends, and he convinced me of the apparent difficulty of it. I had this initial prejudice that, if I juggle around with this for a few days, I will be able to show him that it's a little bit beyond the textbook material, but sab kuch ho jayega. But after 3 days, I realized that I was very wrong. And that realization itself is very frustrating. But again, you're a student who has some apprehensions and you don't like to get defeated. So you work more and more. I worked days together, nights together, almost 2 months of summer. I found myself working on the single problem, exhausting pages of notebooks, producing gibberish and not inching even a speck closer to the solution. How frustrating can that get? Actually, what happens is that, like, I was a second year student, so it's not that I have a lot of mathematical ideas in my thought space. So what happens is that you plan out something, that I will try this, I'll try that, and you map a initial path and you travel along that, try to attempt the same problem using these notions. The path appears inviting for some time and then it stops. Very sad, very unplanned. And every researcher, I believe, whomever I have met till date, has to undergo this painful process. You have to come back to square one and start again. You have to do it many, many times, probably indefinite number of times, before you turn out to be lucky enough to get the solution. The only good thing I see is the more you struggle, maybe the happiness will be greater. So by the end of summer, I was lucky enough to have produced a solution, a theoretical solution, and I was wondering if there would be someone other than me who would say it's correct. So I have this maths professor called, who has been a great inspiration for me for the last 2-3 years. She was visiting a pilgrimage in North India that time. So I called her up and I said that, ma'am, I have produced this solution. Can you look up? And by the way, by God's grace, she was caught in a landslide, so she had time. And I typed out the whole solution overnight and I sent it to her. She took a day or two. And since I was attempting something completely out of the league for the first time, she was very skeptical. She's usually very skeptical. So she got back to me after 2 days and she said, it looks okay. And but then the funny thing is that in physics, of course, you have to produce results. I mean, you have to work out your formulas, you have to produce results which people understand, because not everyone will be prepared to appreciate the rigorous mathematics that you use to produce solutions which are 4-10 pages long. They would like to make sense out of pictures if you can produce, even in the scientific community. So I came back here by that time and I started writing programs in MATLAB to get results out of the equations I had derived. To my surprise, it turned out that the computer is taking hours and hours before throwing up a number on the screen. Further frustration, there's no end to this. So I used to run a code in the morning and go back go to class and come back during a break and see if there's a number. The computer is getting hotter and hotter and nothing appears. So I immediately concluded that this solution is not robust and I should do something better. I again went back to square one and started working from scratch. I was really lucky that this time, with all the failure experience I had collected, in 2 weeks' time I had a new formula on a sheet of paper in front of me. I really celebrate that sheet till date and I have this. And that formula actually not only solved the problem, it also made the computation much faster. Then I started writing the paper on the encouragement of few professors who learned about it. And meanwhile, as I was working on it, I realized that something funny is happening. What I noticed is that there are these 5-10 problems to which I'm trying to compute a solution, and the computer is throwing up the same solution every time. This is quite absurd. Every problem has a unique solution. It's very unexpected in science in general that you have multiple problems and you get the same answer out of it. I was very surprised because I was trying to build a lot of hopes onto this, that I'll get something out of it now, and it's very frustrating. It took me 3 months to realize that I was actually stumbling upon something new, completely new in the field of quantum tunneling. This phenomena I called as the Elias effect because a single solution becomes the copy for multiple problems. I mean, multiple problems have the same solution. And it got accepted into the American journal last June. some people told that, would you like your paper to come up in Nature? It cannot come in Nature, I can tell you. But I strongly believe that the Elias effect deserves a mention in every undergraduate textbook in quantum mechanics. So through these two experiences, I have shown you that there are a lot of emotions which connect. There is excitement, there is fear. Whether you conclude the way you like or not, every creator enjoys the process of creativity. In a one-liner, I can only say that it's dreadful for the beginner, but delightful for the bold. Thank you.